Have you ever had that feeling that you're living a lie? That little itch deep in your soul telling you something isn't right? But you keep going because you're afraid to discover what's behind the curtain? I lived like that for 12 long years, until the day I answered a phone call that changed everything. Good afternoon, my dears. My name is Eleanor Williams. I'm 77 years old today, born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. Before I continue with my story, I'd like to ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. It's always a joy to know my words reach so many different places. Now, let's go back to 1968. I was 20 years old when I married Richard. Oh, what a dreamer I was. I came from a humble family. My father worked at the farmer's market selling produce, and my mother took in sewing. I only studied until 8th grade, as was common for girls in my day. Back then, every young woman's dream was to find a good husband, start a family, and have a home to call her own. Richard appeared in my life like a gift from heaven. At least that's what I thought. He was 28, owned a small but prosperous grocery store downtown. He had gentle manners, spoke beautifully, and treated me like a princess during our courtship. Every Sunday he'd come for lunch at our house, always bringing a little sweet for my mother, discussing politics with my father. He won over my entire family. We married at the First Baptist Church with a white dress my mother spent 3 months sewing. The reception was simple, but it was the happiest day of my life until then. Richard had bought a 3-bedroom house in the newer part of town. It wasn't luxurious, but to me, who had shared a tiny bedroom with 2 sisters, it seemed like a palace. The first years were like a dream. I took care of the house with all my heart, made sure everything was impeccable when he came home from work. I cooked his favorite dishes, kept his shirts perfectly ironed. He brought small gifts occasionally, a bottle of perfume, an embroidered handkerchief, little things that made me feel special. His grocery store was doing well. Williams Market was the fancy name he'd given it. He sold a bit of everything: rice, beans, flour, but also had a small section of imported products that attracted wealthier customers. I'd go there sometimes to help at the register or arrange the shelves, but Richard always said, "My wife doesn't need to work outside the home. Your place is taking care of our home." At the time, that sounded like care, like protection. Today I know it was the first sign of the control he established over me. Drop by drop, like a fine rain that you barely notice is soaking you until you're drenched. In our 7th year of marriage, something happened that changed our routine. Richard installed a telephone in our home. Imagine, in 1968, having a telephone was almost a luxury. Few houses in the neighborhood had one. I remember the day the man from the telephone company came to install a heavy black apparatus that sat on a small table in the hallway between the living room and kitchen. "It's for business," Richard explained. "This way suppliers can contact me at home when they need to make urgent deliveries or when a good price opportunity comes up." I was so proud. A telephone at home. I thought I could call my sisters, my mother who lived on the other side of town. But that same day, Richard established the rules. "Eleanor," he said in that calm voice that didn't allow for argument, "this telephone is only for grocery business. I don't want a high bill at the end of the month. And more importantly, when it rings and I'm not here, you don't answer it. Let it ring. If it's important, they'll call back later." I found it strange, I admit. But who was I to question? He was the man of the house, the provider. If he said the phone was for business, then it was for business. Besides, I barely knew how to use that contraption properly. The first time I tried, I got so nervous talking to the operator that Richard laughed at me for a week. So the telephone became an almost sacred object in our house. It could be seen, but not touched. I dusted it every day, but that was it. When it rang in Richard's absence, I would look at it like someone looking at a snake ready to strike. I'd let it ring until it stopped, sometimes counting the rings, like counting the anxious beats of my heart. Over time, I began to notice a pattern. The phone rang more at night, after 8 p.m., when stores were already closed. What supplier would call at that hour? And more curiously, Richard began to insist on answering always on the first or second ring, as if he were expecting the call. When he answered, his voice changed, became lower, more contained. Sometimes he would say only yes, no, short phrases, and then hang up. It was around this time that I noticed the first changes in Richard. He started coming home later, saying he needed to close out the register, check inventory, wait for delayed deliveries. He began going out some nights, claiming meetings with other merchants in the area. When I asked for details, he responded impatiently, "These are men's matters, Eleanor. You wouldn't understand." I didn't question. That's how wives were supposed to behave in those days. Trusting, supportive, not making a fuss. My mother always said, "Men have their business, women have theirs. Don't meddle where you're not invited." And I followed that advice to the letter. But there was more. Richard, who was always careful with money, became even more controlling with household finances. Before, he would give me an amount at the beginning of the month for shopping and expenses, and I would manage as I saw fit. Suddenly, he began asking for detailed accounts of every penny spent. He questioned whether we really needed more soap, a new dish towel, meat for Sunday. "Times are tough, Eleanor. The economy isn't doing well. We need to tighten our belts," he justified. I believed him. Of course. President Johnson was in office. The Vietnam War was raging. Every day the radio announced new economic measures, new problems. Who was I to doubt that business might be suffering? But the grocery store always seemed full of customers whenever I went there. And Richard continued bringing in new products, expanding the shelves. If there was a crisis, it didn't seem to affect William's Market. That's when I noticed other subtle changes. The shelves at the grocery store, which were always abundant, began to have empty spaces. "Supply problems," Richard explained. He began losing weight, developing deep circles under his eyes, like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Several times I caught him awake in the middle of the night, sitting at the kitchen table, doing calculations in notebooks that he quickly closed when I appeared. "Just organizing the store accounts," he'd say with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Go back to bed, Eleanor." And I'd go back with a growing weight in my chest, a restlessness I couldn't name. I prayed quietly, asking God to take away that bad feeling growing inside me. The telephone, meanwhile, rang more and more, sometimes early in the morning before Richard left for the store, sometimes late at night when we were already in bed. He always ran to answer it, as if his life depended on it. Once the phone rang at 11 p.m. Richard had gone out to one of those mysterious business meetings. I sat staring at the device, counting the rings. 1, 2, 3, up to 15. It stopped, only to start again 2 minutes later. I almost found the courage to answer, but fear was stronger. Fear of disobeying, fear of discovering something I shouldn't. When Richard came home 2 hours later, I mentioned the phone calls. They called several times very late. It seemed urgent. He went pale. "Who was it? Did you answer?" "No, you told me never to answer." The relief on his face was so visible it frightened me. "You did well," he said, running his hand through his thinning hair. It was probably a wrong number or some drunk dialing random numbers. But the next day I found Richard whispering on the phone early in the morning. "I already said I'll solve it. Give me more time. Just 2 more weeks." Something was very wrong. I knew it in the depths of my heart, but I had no idea what it was. The breaking point came on a Sunday in 1969. We had been married for 12 years by then. It was May. I remember clearly because I had made a special cake to celebrate Richard's birthday. He was turning 40. But he barely touched the cake. He said he needed to visit a cousin in Macon, a neighboring city, to resolve a family matter. "I'll be back before nightfall," he promised, kissing my forehead as he always did when leaving. I spent the day alone, like so many other Sundays. Washed clothes, prepared Monday's lunch, cleaned the house. In the middle of the afternoon, the phone started ringing. As always, I let it ring. It rang again 5 minutes later, and then again, and again. On the sixth or seventh attempt, something inside me snapped. It was as if an inner voice shouted, "Answer that phone, Eleanor. Your life is at stake." With my heart beating so hard it seemed ready to jump out of my mouth, I walked to the phone. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the receiver as I picked it up. "Hello?" My voice came out thin, almost a whisper. On the other end, a momentary silence, followed by a harsh, impatient male voice. "Finally someone answers in this house. Look, lady, I don't know who you are, but tell Mr. Williams the deadline is up. Either he starts paying what he owes by the end of the week, or we'll take the house and the store. He knows who he's dealing with." At that moment, I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. I could barely respond. He's not here. He went out. He'll be back tonight." The voice on the other end became even more irritated. "It's always the same story. Not here. Went out. Coming back later. Look, lady, let me make this clear. Your husband owes too much money to people you don't mess with. It's been almost 2 years that he's been borrowing to pay for gambling and only pays the interest when we squeeze him. The patience is over." "Gah! Gambling!" was all I could stammer. The man let out a dry laugh. "You didn't know? Your husband is a regular at the underground casinos in Atlanta. Every week he's there, thinking he'll recover what he lost the previous week. Typical addict. Started owing small change. Now he owes more than that dump of a grocery store is worth." My world collapsed in that instant. I thanked him with a trembling voice, said I would pass on the message, and hung up. I sat on the floor, right there in the hallway, unable to move, to think clearly. Gambling, debts, years of lies. The control over money, the night outings, the forbidden telephone. It all made sense now. A terrible sense that filled me with dread. When I managed to get up, I went straight to our bedroom. I searched everything, drawers, closets, even the lining of the wardrobe where Richard kept his document box. And there they were, notebook after notebook of records, crumpled receipts, notes with thinly veiled threats, papers with names and astronomical amounts. On one of the papers I found something that completely chilled my soul. A promissory note where Richard had put up as collateral the small house I had inherited from my parents when they passed away 3 years earlier. The only thing that was truly mine, the only property I owned before our marriage, and he had used it as collateral without ever consulting me, without even telling me. Sitting there among that paperwork that evidenced years of lies, I cried like I had never cried before. I cried for the naive girl I had been, for the betrayed trust, for the uncertain future that now awaited us. I cried until I had no more tears, and then something changed inside me. It was as if a switch had been flipped. I dried my tears, carefully organized all the papers, put everything back in the hiding place, and began to think about what I would do next. Richard returned as dusk was falling, as he had promised. He seemed dejected, tired. I gave him a kiss on the cheek. I served dinner like any other Sunday. I watched him eat in silence, studying each expression, each gesture. How could I have been so blind for so long, I thought. Did anyone call? He asked casually, as he did every night. I took a deep breath. It was time for truth. Yes, Richard, someone called, and this time I answered. You should have seen his face at that moment. It was as if Richard had seen a ghost. The fork fell from his hand and hit the plate with a noise that seemed to echo throughout the house. You answered the phone? His voice came out strangled, almost a whisper. At that moment, my dears, I felt a strength I had never felt before. It was as if all the saints in heaven were giving me courage. I kept my voice firm, looking directly into his eyes. Yes, Richard. And it wasn't just anyone who called. It was a very angry man talking about gambling debts. Big debts that could cost us everything. At first he tried to deny it, of course. Men like Richard always try. He said it was a misunderstanding, that I must have misheard, that it was a confused supplier. But I was no longer that naive Eleanor who accepted any explanation with a smile. Enough lies, I said, rising from the table. I found everything. The notebooks, the receipts, the promissory notes. I know you've been frequenting casinos in Atlanta. I know you owe fortunes to loan sharks. And I know, Richard, that you put my parents' house up as collateral without ever saying a word to me." It was as if his entire posture collapsed suddenly. His shoulders fell, his head lowered. For the first time since I had known him, I saw Richard cry. They weren't discreet tears. They were the sobs of a defeated man. Between tears came the confession. It all started in 1967, when the economy was struggling because of the situation in Vietnam. The grocery store had a few bad months, and he was worried about not being able to maintain our standard of living. A merchant friend took him to an underground casino in Atlanta, promising he could quickly recover the losses. "I won on the first night," he recounted, wiping his face with his shirt sleeve. "I won more money in one night than the grocery store made in a month. I thought I had found the solution to all our problems." But as always happens with gambling, my dears, luck left as quickly as it came. He went back to recover what he lost more, went back again. And so began the terrible cycle that destroys so many families. At first, he used only money from the grocery store. Then he began taking small loans from other merchants. When those weren't enough anymore, he turned to loan sharks, dangerous men who lent money at exorbitant interest rates and didn't hesitate to use violent methods to collect. The debts grew, interest accumulated. Each time he paid a part, the principal amount seemed to increase instead of decrease. It was like trying to empty the sea with a leaky bucket. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. "We could have faced this together from the beginning." "I was ashamed," he answered, suddenly looking much smaller, much older than his 40 years. "You always admired me so much, always saw me as a successful man, a good provider. I didn't want you to know what a failure I had become. I spent the entire night awake, my dears, thinking about what to do. Part of me wanted to pack my things and go back to my parents' house, the very same one that was now at risk because of his gambling debts. Another part remembered the vows I made at the altar, for better or for worse. Wasn't this the worst part? In the morning, I made my decision. I called Richard to the kitchen table and placed before him all the notebooks and papers I had found. "We're going to fix this together," I said, "but I have conditions. First, he would have to stop gambling completely. No, just one more time. No, just to recover. Total cutoff. Second, he would need to seek help. Back then, there weren't groups like Gamblers Anonymous, but the pastor of our church had experience counseling men with similar addictions. Third, and perhaps most importantly, from that moment on, all financial decisions would be made by both of us. Not a penny would come in or go out without my knowledge. And if I don't agree?" he asked, in a final flicker of the male pride that dominated that era. "Then I'll be on the bus to my sister's house tomorrow morning," I replied, with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "And you'll explain to your creditors why your wife abandoned ship." He agreed to everything. What else could he do? We were on the brink of the abyss, and he knew it better than anyone. That same afternoon, I made a complete inventory of our situation. The news was even worse than I had imagined. The total debt was almost 10 times what the grocery store earned in a year. The house where we lived was already committed to one of the creditors. The grocery store had more products on the shelves than in stock. Richard had started selling on credit to many customers, hoping to make cash quickly. Looking at those frightening numbers, an ordinary person would have given up. But you know, my dears, that Eleanor was never an ordinary person. I took my small savings, a little nest egg that I kept hidden at the bottom of a cookie tin, as my mother had taught me. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to buy ingredients. Since I was a girl, I had talent in the kitchen, especially for baked goods. My pies, cakes, and preserves always were a hit at church events. The next morning, I transformed our porch into a small baked goods stand. I put out a nice tablecloth, arranged the treats in colorful containers. I made a simple sign, "Eleanor's Sweets, made with love." The neighbors were the first customers, more out of curiosity than anything else. But soon the news spread. "You have to try Eleanor's sweets," they would tell each other. By the end of the first day, I had sold everything and received orders for the next day. Meanwhile, Richard kept his part of the agreement. He started attending counseling with Pastor John twice a week. The first months were difficult. He had relapses, got irritable, sometimes disappeared for hours, leaving me in panic. But he always came back, usually ashamed, promising it would be the last time. We gradually regularized the grocery store situation. Richard talked with creditors, explaining our situation, asking for longer payment terms. Some understood, others threatened, but all ended up accepting when they saw we were truly willing to pay every penny. We just needed time. My little sweets stand grew quickly. Soon, I needed help and hired Teresa, a neighborhood girl, to help with deliveries. Then came Marlene to help in the kitchen. We worked from sunup to sundown. I woke up at 4 a.m. to start making the sweets. I worked until noon, rested a bit, and then went to help Richard at the grocery store until nightfall. They were very hard years, my dears. I won't lie to you. There were days when I thought we wouldn't make it. Days when the exhaustion was so great that I cried while stirring the pot of jam. Days when creditors showed up at the store making threats, and I trembled with fear of what might happen. Days when Richard relapsed and lost part of the money we had gathered with such sacrifice. But there were also small joys. The first time we managed to pay off one of the smaller debts entirely. The satisfaction of seeing my sweets being praised by people from other towns. The pride in Richard's eyes when he managed to complete another month without succumbing to his addiction. 3 years passed like this. Slowly, with much effort, we began to see a light at the end of the tunnel. The debts were still large, but now they seemed manageable. The grocery store was recovering. My sweets had loyal customers, and I was beginning to dream of my own shop someday. Richard also seemed like a different man. The addiction never completely disappears, he would say, but he had learned to control it, to recognize the triggers, to seek help when the temptation became too strong. He became again that attentive man from the beginning of our marriage, bringing small gifts, helping more at home, listening to my ideas for the business with genuine interest. That March of 1972 finally seemed to bring us calm after the storm. We had just made an agreement to settle one of the largest debts, the one that threatened my parents' house. We celebrated with a bottle of wine, a rare luxury for us in those times. "We're going to make it, Eleanor," Richard said, holding my hand across the table. "Thanks to you, we're going to rebuild our life." It was exactly 1 week after this conversation that the phone rang again, changing the course of my life once more. It was Tuesday, and it was raining heavily. Richard had gone out to make deliveries. The grocery store now offered this service to special customers, my idea to increase sales. I was in the kitchen testing a new recipe for orange cake that a customer had requested for her daughter's birthday. The phone rang at 3:30 in the afternoon. I answered without thinking twice. After all, the old taboo about not answering the phone had been broken a long time ago. Now I even took calls for the grocery store when Richard was busy. "Hello, Williams residence," I answered, drying my hands on my apron. "Hello, is Richard there? I need to confirm our meeting tonight." It was a female voice, young, with a slight accent I couldn't identify. Something in her tone immediately put me on alert, like an animal sensing danger. "He's out making deliveries," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Who's calling, please?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Is this his wife?" "Yes, I'm Eleanor, Richard's wife. And you are—" Another longer silence, then a sigh. "My name is Diana. I didn't know he was married." I felt as if someone had thrown a bucket of ice water over me. My hand gripped the receiver so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "I'm sorry? I don't understand what you're talking about." She seemed confused. "He never mentioned a wife. He always said he lived alone, that the house was just his. We've been seeing each other for over a year." The world seemed to spin around me. I needed to lean on the table to keep from falling. A year, more than a year. While I woke up before dawn to make sweets, while I sweated to help pay off his debts, while I believed we were rebuilding our life together, he was having an affair. Are you saying that you have a relationship with my husband? I asked, still not wanting to believe. Yes, she replied. We met at a bar in Atlanta. He comes to visit me twice a week. He said the other days he needs to stay at the grocery store until late. I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to scream, to curse, to throw the phone against the wall, but that's not how Eleanor Williams solved her problems. I see. And today you have a meeting? Yes, she answered, seeming increasingly uncomfortable. He said he would stop by at 7, as always. Thank you for letting me know, Diana. Have a good afternoon. I hung up the phone with a calmness I didn't feel. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, trying to process what I had just discovered. 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of waking up before sunrise, 3 years enduring his bad moods on difficult days, celebrating each small victory against the addiction, believing we were together in that struggle. And during that time, during at least 1 year of that time, he had another woman. The tears came, inevitable. I cried quietly so the neighbors wouldn't hear, so no one would know my humiliation. I cried for Eleanor, who once again had been deceived, who once again had believed Richard's beautiful words. But when the tears dried, resolution came. No, I would not be made a fool a second time. I would not go back to being that submissive wife who accepts anything to keep up appearances, to not be talked about in town. I dried my face, went back to the kitchen, and finished making the orange cake. Then I cleaned the whole house, as I always did on Tuesdays. I washed, ironed, and folded Richard's shirts. I put the nicest one on top of the bed, that navy blue one he wore for special occasions. Next to the shirt, I left a note. For you to wear to your meeting tonight. Everything is arranged with Diana. You two have fun. Then I started packing my bags. I didn't take much. Some clothes, photographs of my family, our wedding album, ironic, isn't it? And my recipe notebook. The rest could stay behind along with the 12 years I had dedicated to this marriage. At 6 p.m., Richard returned from deliveries. He found the packed bags in the living room and the note on top of the bed. His face, when he saw me sitting calmly on the porch, was the very image of desperation. Eleanor, I can explain. It's not what you're thinking. As they always say, isn't that right, my dears? There's nothing to explain, Richard, I replied without raising my voice. I've had my fill of lies for a lifetime. It was a weakness, he begged, kneeling in front of me. It's over. I ended it with her when you discovered the debts. I realized I couldn't lose you, that you were the only person who truly cared about me. A laugh without humor escaped my lips. Ended it? Then why did she just call, confirming your meeting for tonight? He was speechless, defeated by his own lie. Listen well, Richard, I said, rising from my chair. Once deceived, I can forgive. Twice, it's a pattern. I will not be deceived a third time. I took my bags, called a taxi, another rare luxury in those times, and left for the house I had inherited from my parents. Fortunately, the promissory note that Richard had signed, putting the house as collateral, had not yet been executed. It was the only place I could go. When the taxi pulled away, I looked back and saw Richard standing in the doorway, looking smaller and more fragile than ever. For a brief moment, I felt sorry for him. But I quickly remembered that pity was not a basis for marriage. Respect was, trust was, and he had destroyed both. At 32 years old, I found myself alone, with debts that weren't mine and a broken heart. But I was also mistress of my own destiny for the first time in my life. And that Eleanor, my dears, that Eleanor was just beginning to discover her strength. You know that saying, when God closes a door, he opens a window? In my life, it wasn't quite like that. God closed a door and left me in the dark hallway for a little while, waiting for me to find the courage to open the next one myself. And that's exactly what I did. That little house I inherited from my parents seemed so different now. When they were alive, it was a home full of laughter, smells of good food, conversations on the porch on hot summer nights. After they passed away and I married Richard, it became just a property, a possession, and now it was my only refuge. The house had been abandoned for a few years, with only an occasional cleaning that I did every month or two. There was dust everywhere, cobwebs in the corners, the yard overgrown with weeds. But it had a roof, solid walls, and most importantly, it was in my name. I spent the first night crying. I won't lie to you. I cried for lost time, for wasted love, for the humiliation. But in the morning, when the first rays of sun came through the window, I dried my tears and started cleaning. I didn't have time to keep feeling sorry for myself. I had an entire life to rebuild. In 3 days, I transformed that dusty house into a home again. I cleaned every corner, arranged the few pieces of furniture that remained, improvised curtains with old fabrics I found stored away. On the 4th day, I transformed the kitchen into my new sweets factory. I didn't have the equipment from the house I shared with Richard, didn't have money to buy new ones, but I had my hands, my recipes stored in memory, and a fierce determination to never again depend on any man to survive. The first challenge was getting ingredients. I used the little money I had to buy sugar, fruit, flour. I started with simple recipes that required few ingredients: cookies, mini cakes, muffins. I made a simple sign: Eleanor's Sweets, now at a new address. At first it was difficult. People in town already knew my sweets, but news of the separation spread like wildfire. In 1972, a separated woman was viewed differently. Many ladies who once praised my cookies now pretended not to see me on the street. Some even stopped buying, saying they didn't support a woman who abandoned her husband. If they only knew the truth. But I wasn't going to explain myself, to justify myself. My grandmother always said, "The more you explain, the more approval you're seeking." And I didn't need anyone's approval, only my own. Fortunately, not everyone thought this way. Mrs. Carmichael, a widow who lived 2 streets down, was one of the first to seek me out. "I don't know what happened between you and Richard, and it's none of my business," she said. "All I know is that your sweets are the best in the region, and I want to order some for my granddaughter's birthday." It was a small order, just some cookies and little cakes, but it meant so much to me, not just for the money, but for the trust, the respect. I put extra care into that order. I wanted it to be perfect. The next day, Mrs. Carmichael came back. "Eleanor, I've never had such good cookies. Everyone at the birthday party wanted to know who made them. I already have 3 neighbors wanting to order for their own parties." That's how I began, by word of mouth, from one small order to another, slightly larger one. In the first month, I barely managed to pay the bills. In the second, I was able to save a little money. In the third, I already needed help to handle all the orders. I hired Nancy, a young woman from the neighborhood, to help me in the kitchen. She learned quickly and had good hands for baking. Soon after, I needed to call in Josephine to help with deliveries and cleaning. My small kitchen could no longer keep up. Within 6 months, I transformed the front room of the house into an improvised shop. I put in a shelf, some glass displays to show the sweets, a hand-painted sign, "Sweet Memories, from Eleanor's kitchen to your home." It was around this time that the first message from Richard arrived. It wasn't a letter, but a note brought by the grocery store delivery boy. "Eleanor, we need to talk. The grocery store isn't doing well without you. I'm not doing well without you. Please give me another chance." I didn't respond. What for? There was nothing to say. 2 weeks later, he showed up in person. He was thinner, with deep circles under his eyes. He seemed to have aged years in just a few months. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Eleanor, please. I made mistakes. I know I made a lot of mistakes, but I'm paying for them every day. The grocery store is sinking. The creditors are more aggressive. I can't manage everything alone." It was all about him, did you notice? About his problems, his difficulties. Not a word about my feelings, about how he had shattered my heart, betrayed my trust when I needed him most. "I'm sorry, Richard," I replied with all the calmness I could gather. "Your problems are no longer my problems. Good luck." And I closed the door. He came back other times, always with the same litany, always centered on himself. During his last visit in October 1972, he was especially agitated. "The creditors are going to take everything, Eleanor, the grocery store, the house, everything. I don't know what to do." I looked at him, and for the first time felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hurt, no pity, just indifference. It was liberating. "I suggest you sell everything while you still have the chance, pay what you owe, and start over somewhere else," I responded and went back to my kitchen, where a batch of cakes awaited me. That was the last time I saw Richard for many years. I learned from acquaintances that he really did sell everything, paid off part of the debts, and moved to another state. The grocery store became a fabric shop. The house where we lived for 12 years became a pharmacy. Meanwhile, my small business was growing. By 1973, it no longer fit in my parents' house. I needed my own space, with professional equipment, more employees. I went to the bank to apply for a loan, something frightening for a divorced woman in the 70s. The manager, Mr. Thompson, looked at me over his glasses with that expression men use when they think women don't understand business. "Do you have any guarantor, ma'am? Your father, perhaps, or a brother?" "No," I responded, keeping my posture erect. "I have only my work history, my loyal customers, and this house which is in my name, free of any debts." He hesitated, leafed through my documents, asked more questions. In the end, he approved a smaller loan than I had requested, with higher interest than they would offer a man. But it was enough to start. I rented a small building on Main Street. It used to be a shoe store that closed when the owner moved to Chicago. I renovated everything, bought industrial ovens, mixers, utensils. The grand opening of the first official Sweet Memories shop was on January 5, 1974. I keep that date in my heart as if it were a second birthday. Customers came from all over the region. My former helpers were now registered employees with everything official. I had to hire 4 more girls to meet the demand. We expanded the menu. In addition to traditional sweets, we began offering cakes for parties, pies, fine pastries. The success drew attention. In May of that year, a reporter from the Atlanta Journal came to do a story about the baker who conquered the countryside. The photograph of the shop appeared on the first page of the business section with the title, "From Home Kitchen to Business Success, the Story of Eleanor Williams." It was the first time I saw myself as a businesswoman, as an entrepreneur. Until then, I was just surviving, doing what I knew how to do to ensure my livelihood. But that article made me see further, dream bigger. In 1975, I opened the second shop, this time in Atlanta. It was a risky step. The capital was another world, with more competition, more demanding customers. But my sweets had something special, something people recognized at first taste. "They taste like childhood," many customers said. "They taste like Grandma's house." The secret? There was no secret. Just respect for traditional recipes, for quality ingredients, for the right timing of each preparation, and perhaps, just perhaps, a little bit of my story in each sweet. The bitterness transformed into sugar. The pain transformed into art. By 1978, my name was known throughout the state. Sweet Memories became synonymous with quality, tradition, authentic flavor. We had 4 shops, more than 30 employees, and a small factory on the outskirts of Savannah, where we produced on a larger scale to supply all the units. It was in this year that I received an unexpected call. It was from Diana. Yes, that same Diana. The woman who inadvertently revealed Richard's betrayal to me. "Mrs. Williams, I don't know if you remember me." How could I forget? That voice had changed the course of my life. "Yes, I remember you, Diana. What can I do for you?" She was in a difficult situation. After Richard left, she discovered she was pregnant with his child. She raised the boy alone for 5 years, working as a seamstress. Now she was having financial difficulties and wanted to know if Richard had left any contact, any way to locate him to ask for help. I felt a pang in my chest, not from jealousy or hurt. Those feelings had long been overcome. But for that innocent child, paying for the mistakes of his absent father. I haven't had contact with Richard for years, Diana, but if you need work, I'm expanding my business and need trustworthy people. She hesitated, clearly surprised by the offer. After everything, you're offering me work? The past is the past. Besides, it wasn't you who betrayed my trust. You were also deceived by him. The following week, Diana started working at the Atlanta shop. She was hardworking, learned quickly, and little Michael, her son with Richard, won everyone's hearts with his shy smile and curious eyes. In a few months, I promoted Diana to store manager. In a year, she became my personal assistant, helping me manage the entire network. Some people found it strange, even inappropriate. "How can you employ your ex-husband's mistress?" asked the venomous tongues. I would just smile and answer, "I hold grudges only against those who deserve them, and I don't hold even those for long. They take up too much space in the heart." The 1980s arrived, bringing more expansion, more challenges, more achievements. We opened shops in Nashville, Charlotte, Richmond. Our sweets began to be sold in supermarkets, packaged with our registered trademark, a silhouette of a woman stirring a pot of sweets with the slogan, "The Taste of Overcoming." In 1982, I received an offer to sell the company to a larger group. They offered a fortune, more money than I had ever dreamed of having. I refused without hesitation. Sweet Memories wasn't just a business for me. It was my story, my liberation, my proof that it's possible to start from zero and build something solid, something true. Around this time, I began to think about legacy. I didn't have children, another dream that Richard postponed until it was too late. But I had my employees, many of whom had been with me from the beginning. I had Michael, Diana's son, who now at 10 years old was already saying he wanted to run Aunt Eleanor's sweet factory when he grew up. I decided to create a profit-sharing program, something revolutionary for a company of that size at the time. My longest-serving employees received small percentages of the company. I also created an education fund for their children, ensuring that all could study and have opportunities their mothers didn't have. In 1985, we had the greatest proof that we were on the right track. Business and Finance magazine, one of the most important in the country, published a cover story about the 10 most successful businesswomen in the South. There I was, Eleanor Williams, former housewife, now commanding an empire of sweets with an annual revenue of millions. The reporter who interviewed me asked what was the secret of my success. I answered with the simplicity that always characterized me. There is no secret, just hard work, respect for traditions, and the conviction that no mistake is too big to prevent us from starting over. Each sweet that leaves my shops carries a piece of my story. A story of falling and rising, of pain and overcoming. Perhaps that's what people feel when they taste one of our sweets. It's not just sugar and flavor, it's life transformed into something sweet. That interview changed how I myself viewed my journey. For the first time, I looked back and understood the dimension of what I had built. It wasn't just a company. It was a symbol that women can indeed rise from devastating situations and build empires. And it all started with a phone call. A phone call I should never have answered, according to the rules of my marriage. A phone call that broke my heart, but liberated my soul. Funny how life works, isn't it, my dears? Sometimes the greatest pain can be the beginning of the greatest joy. Sometimes the end is just the beginning of something much bigger than we could ever imagine. You've heard that saying, "What goes around comes around." In my life, it went around so many times that sometimes I feel dizzy just remembering. And one of the biggest surprises came precisely when I least expected it, at the height of my success. It was 1987. Sweet Memories was already a chain with 12 shops spread across 5 southern states. We had a main factory in Savannah and 2 smaller ones in Atlanta and Charleston. More than 200 employees directly depended on the business I started in my parents' kitchen. I, who was once just the wife of Mr. Williams from the grocery store, was now known as Mrs. Eleanor, the businesswoman, the pioneer, the woman who built an empire of sweets with her own hands. That year, we were preparing something special, the opening of our first shop in New York City. It was a huge step, even frightening. New York was another world, bigger, faster, more demanding. Many people advised me against this expansion. Mrs. Eleanor, New Yorkers won't understand our southern sweets, some said. There's too much competition there, brands that are too big, others warned. But I was always stubborn. You must have realized that by now, right? When I set my mind on something, I go all the way. And something told me it was time to take sweet memories beyond the South, to show the entire country that our baking tradition deserved national recognition. The shop would be on Fifth Avenue, one of the most important in the city. The rent was exorbitant, the initial investment frightening, but we had done our homework, market research, adaptations to the menu to please the New York palate, special training for the team that would work there. 2 weeks before the opening, I traveled to New York to supervise the final details. I wanted everything to be perfect, from the decoration to the training of the employees. Diana came with me. After so many years, she had become my right hand, my person of trust. Michael, now 15 years old, also accompanied us. He was on school break and loved to participate in the family business, as he called it. The day was busy. I tasted new recipes our chef had developed especially for New York. I approved the final design of the storefront. I reviewed contracts with local suppliers. It was already past 6 p.m. when we could finally take a break. We decided to have dinner at a nearby restaurant, recommended by the building manager. The place was elegant but cozy. We sat at a table in the back. I ordered wine to celebrate this new conquest. We were talking animatedly about the opening when the maitre d's voice caught my attention. "Mr. Williams, your table is ready." Williams. Richard's last name. Of course, it must be a coincidence. Williams isn't such an uncommon name. I continued talking, but my eyes involuntarily sought the entrance of the restaurant, and there he was. Richard Williams, 15 years older, with completely gray hair, heavier than I remembered, but unmistakably him. He was accompanied by a distinguished-looking lady, probably the same age as him, and a young man, perhaps around 20 years old. My heart skipped a beat, not from love, not from longing. Those emotions had been left behind a long time ago. It was more a jolt of surprise, that strange feeling of seeing someone we once knew so intimately, who now seems like a stranger. "Eleanor, what's wrong? You've gone pale," Diana asked, noticing my sudden change in expression. Before I could answer, Richard turned in our direction. Our eyes met. I saw recognition in his, followed by something I couldn't identify. Surprise, perhaps embarrassment, perhaps regret. He whispered something to the woman at his side, and then, to my surprise, began walking toward our table. "Eleanor," he said, standing a few steps away, as if not daring to come closer. "What a surprise to find you here." 15 years. 15 years since I had seen him begging at my door to come back, talking about creditors, debts, the sinking grocery store. And now, there he was, well-dressed, apparently well-off, in one of the most expensive restaurants in New York. "Hello, Richard," I replied, keeping my voice firm. "It is a surprise indeed." An awkward silence settled. Diana looked from one to the other, confused. Michael, who had never heard about Richard, I avoided mentioning that part of my life, seemed intrigued. "You look great," he finally said. "I've heard about your success. Sweet Memories is everywhere in the South, isn't it?" I nodded without knowing exactly what to say. Part of me wanted to send him away, to say we had nothing to talk about after so many years, after everything that happened. But another part, perhaps the older, wiser part, was curious. How had he recovered? What had happened in his life? And who were those people with him? As if reading my thoughts, Richard turned and made a gesture to the woman and young man accompanying him. They approached, both with politely curious expressions. "Eleanor, this is Claire, my wife, and this is Robert, our son." Wife, son. Richard had rebuilt his life, just as I had rebuilt mine. For some reason, this brought me a strange comfort. I greeted them both politely. Claire had a gentle smile, intelligent eyes. Robert was the spitting image of his father in his youth, the same almond-shaped eyes, the same strong chin. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Williams," said Claire with a sincerity that surprised me. "Richard has told me a lot about you." I raised my eyebrows, unable to hide my surprise. Richard talked about me to his current wife. What could he have said? That he betrayed me? That he almost financially ruined me with gambling debts and lies? "Only good things, I assure you," Claire added, as if sensing my discomfort. "About your strength, your determination, how you started your business from scratch and transformed it into something so successful." That was unexpected. Before I could respond, I remembered Diana and Michael sitting at the table, observing everything with evident curiosity. "This is Diana, my partner and friend," I introduced. "And this is Michael, her son." I saw Richard's eyes widen slightly as he looked at Michael. Did he recognize something familiar in that young face? Did he realize that this young man could have been his son too? If he noticed, he didn't show it. He greeted them both politely and then, to my surprise, asked, "Have you ordered yet? Would you mind if we joined you? It's been so long, it would be good to talk a bit." I looked at Diana, seeking her approval. After all, she had more reasons than I did to not want Richard's company. But Diana, always surprising, shrugged and smiled. "It's fine by me." And so, what started as a business dinner transformed into something completely unexpected, a reunion with a past I thought I had left behind. The first few minutes were strange, tense. We talked about the weather, about New York, about trivialities. But after the wine was served and the food arrived, the conversation began to flow more naturally. Richard told us that after selling everything in Savannah and paying off part of the debts, he moved to Raleigh. There he got a job as manager of a bakery. He met Claire, who was an elementary school teacher, and they married in 1974. Robert was born the following year. They were difficult years, he admitted, not hiding the truth. He still had many debts to pay. He worked 2 jobs to be able to honor his commitments. But one thing I learned from my mistakes, Eleanor, was the importance of honesty. I never wanted to know about gambling again, never wanted to live on appearances again. According to him, the turning point came when the bakery owner, already elderly and without children, decided to retire and offered him a partnership. With a lot of work and Claire's help, who managed the accounts with an iron hand, they managed to make the business thrive. Today, they had a chain of 5 bakeries in North Carolina. "Nothing compared to your empire, of course," he smiled, with a humility that the old Richard would never have shown. "But enough for us to live well, to give our son a good education." As he spoke, I observed Claire. There was genuine love in her eyes when she looked at Richard, at Robert. It was evident they formed a united, loving family. And, as strange as it may seem, I didn't feel jealousy, didn't feel hurt. I only felt peace, the certainty that we had both found our paths, even if separately. When it came time for me to tell my story, I was honest. I talked about the difficult first years after our separation, about how I transformed my talent for baking into a thriving business, about the expansions, the achievements, the challenges. I didn't mention the betrayal, didn't throw the mistakes of the past in his face. What for? Time had already done its work of healing. At one point, Richard looked at Diana and Michael with a curious expression. I realized he was mentally doing the math. Michael was 15 years old. Our separation was 15 years ago, but he said nothing. Some secrets don't need to be revealed. Some questions don't need answers. The dinner ended late. We exchanged contacts, more out of politeness than with any real intention of staying in touch. As we said goodbye, Richard held my hand for a moment longer than necessary. Eleanor, I never had the opportunity to say this properly, but I'm sorry for everything, for the mistakes, for the lies, for the suffering I caused. You deserved better. I looked into his eyes I once knew so well, that I once loved so much, and I saw sincerity. I saw genuine regret. I also saw gratitude, perhaps for not having exposed all the truth in front of his new family, for having allowed him to maintain his dignity. The past is the past, Richard, I replied, with the serenity that only years can bring. Each of us reaped what we sowed, and it seems that in the end, we both planted good things. In the taxi, returning to the hotel, Diana looked at me with an undecipherable expression. "Are you okay?" she asked. I reflected for a moment. Was I okay? I had just had dinner with the man who once broke my heart into 1,000 pieces, who betrayed me, who almost financially ruined me, the man who inadvertently forced me to discover a strength I didn't know I possessed. "I'm at peace," I finally replied. "It's strange, isn't it? For so many years the memory of Richard came with pain, with anger. But today, looking at him, at the life he built, I can only feel gratitude." "Gratitude?" Diana seemed surprised. "For what?" "For setting me free," I answered with a smile. "If our marriage had continued, perhaps I would never have discovered what I'm capable of. Perhaps I would have spent my entire life being just the wife of never Eleanor, the businesswoman. Sometimes, my dears, what seems like a curse reveals itself to be the greatest blessing." Michael, who had been quiet during the entire conversation, finally spoke. "That man, he was my father, wasn't he?" The question caught both Diana and me by surprise. We had never openly discussed this subject with him. Diana had always said only that his father had been a man who briefly passed through her life, who wasn't ready to be a father. Diana looked at me, then at her son, and nodded. "Yes, son, Richard is your biological father, but he never knew about you. And it's better that it stays that way," I added gently. "He's built a new life, has a new family, and we've built ours too, haven't we? Sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the families we're born into." Michael was silent for a moment, then smiled. That smile that so much resembled Richard's in his youth. "Aunt Eleanor is right, Mom. We don't need him. We have each other. We have our Sweet Memories family." I hugged that young man, who in many ways had become like a son to me. Life has these ironies. I, who never could have biological children, ended up adopting the son Richard never knew. And there we were, an unconventional family, united not by blood, but by something much stronger: choice, loyalty, true love. The opening of the New York shop a week later was a resounding success. Lines formed at the door. The press attended in full force. Our sweets enchanted the New York palate. But for me, the true milestone of that trip wasn't the expansion of the business. It was the closure of a chapter of my life that was still open. I never saw Richard again after that dinner. I learned through mutual acquaintances that he passed away in 1996 from a sudden heart attack. I sent flowers to the funeral, a gesture of respect, not for the man he was in our marriage, but for the man he became afterward. A man who found the courage to start over, to admit his mistakes, to build something better. When I think about that night in New York, that unexpected reunion, I realize it was a gift from destiny, a gift that allowed me to make peace, not with Richard, but with myself, with that young Eleanor who once suffered so much, who once felt so much anger, so much resentment. Sometimes, my dears, forgiveness isn't something we offer to others. It's a gift we give ourselves. It's the permission to let go, to move forward without the weight of the past pulling us back. And it all started with a phone call. A phone call I should never have answered, according to the rules imposed by Richard. A phone call that changed everything, that showed me the truth, that freed me. If I'm here today sharing my story with you, it's because I had the courage to answer that phone, The courage to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. The courage to say no to a life of lies and yes to the unknown, to a new beginning. And if there's one lesson I want to leave with you, it's this. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to discover your own strength. And above all, it's never too late to transform your pain into something sweet. Something that not only feeds your body, but also your soul. Do you know what it's like to look back at an entire life and feel that mixture of pride, gratitude, and amazement? That's what I feel today, at 77 years old, sitting on this porch overlooking the garden I planted with my own hands, just as I planted each seed of my business. Time passes in a funny way, doesn't it? It seems like just yesterday I was in my parents' kitchen, mixing sugar and fruits with hands trembling with uncertainty. And suddenly, we're in 2025. And Sweet Memories is a brand recognized throughout the United States with more than 40 shops spread across 15 states. Many people ask me when I'm going to retire. I smile and answer, retire from what? From living? Because making sweets, creating recipes, visiting the shops, talking with customers who have been with me for decades, this isn't work for me, it's life, it's purpose. Of course, I'm not in the day-to-day operations like before. After I turned 70, I passed the executive presidency of the company to Michael. That shy boy I met at age 5 is now a brilliant 50-year-old man with an MBA from Harvard and a natural talent for business that he certainly didn't inherit from Richard. Diana retired 5 years ago. She lives in a beautiful house by the sea in Hilton Head, but she still appears at important company events. We are more than friends. We are sisters that destiny united in the most unlikely way possible. Who would have thought that the other woman would become one of the most important people in my life? Life has these ironies, my dears, and perhaps the greatest of them is that it all started with a phone call that I should never have answered. A phone call that revealed lies, but also opened doors to much greater truths. In 1990, when Sweet Memories completed 20 years, I decided it was time to document our story, not to brag, but to inspire other women who, like me, faced difficult situations and couldn't see a way forward. I hired a writer to help me with the memoirs. We spent 6 months revisiting every moment of the journey, from the marriage with Richard, the gambling debts, the betrayal, to the first sweets sold on the porch, the first shop, the expansion to other cities. When the book, Sweet Memories, How I Transformed Bitterness into Sugar, was published in 1992, I didn't expect it to cause such an impact. I received thousands of letters from women all over the country. Some in situations similar to mine, others facing completely different challenges, but all seeking the same thing: courage to start over. One letter in particular I never forgot. It was from Mary Eunice, a 62-year-old lady from rural Pennsylvania. She wrote, Mrs. Williams, I read your book at a time when I thought my life was over. My husband of 40 years passed away, leaving me only debts and a small farm that barely provided for my livelihood. Your words gave me courage to transform my home garden into an artisanal preserves business. Today, 2 years later, I have 5 employees and supply the best restaurants in the region. Thank you for showing me there's no age to start over. Letters like this made me realize that my story wasn't just mine. It was a beacon for other women lost in the storm. In 1994, I created the Sweet New Beginnings Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women in vulnerable situations achieve financial independence. The foundation offers professional courses, microcredit for small businesses, and mentoring from successful businesswomen. We started in Georgia, but today we have units in 7 states. We've already helped more than 10,000 women transform their lives. Women who, like me once, just needed an opportunity, someone who believed in them. One of the initiatives I'm most proud of is the Young Bakers program, which identifies talented girls in underprivileged communities and offers them scholarships in culinary arts. Many of these young women now work in our shops. Some have become renowned chefs, others have opened their own businesses. To see the sparkle in their eyes, the confidence they develop, the pride when serving their creations. There's no money in the world that can pay for that feeling. In 2000, I received an honor I would never have expected. The city of Savannah named a square after me. Eleanor Williams Square, entrepreneur and benefactor. At the inauguration, I looked around and saw faces that had accompanied me for decades. Former employees, loyal customers, even ladies who at the beginning refused to buy my sweets because I was a separated woman. Time really heals all, doesn't it? It was in this same year that I decided to do something I had been postponing for a long time: visit Richard's grave in Raleigh. I went alone on an autumn morning. I took a small arrangement of wildflowers. He always liked simplicity, despite his grand ambitions. Before that simple tombstone, I didn't feel anger, didn't feel hurt. I felt only gratitude. Gratitude for the good moments we had, because yes, there were good moments in our marriage. Gratitude for the difficult lessons his mistakes taught me. And above all, gratitude for the path his absence forced me to take. "Thank you, Richard," I whispered before walking away. "In a strange way, you helped me find my true purpose." On the way back to the hotel, I passed by one of our shops in Raleigh. I entered without identifying myself, just as a regular customer. The young attendant, who didn't recognize me, animatedly told the story behind the name Sweet Memories. The founder, Mrs. Eleanor, started making sweets on her home porch after a difficult divorce. She says each sweet carries a memory, not just of traditional recipes, but also of the strength she discovered in herself in the bitterest moments. That's why the slogan is "Transforming Stories into Sweet Memories." I smiled, touched to see how our story had become part of the brand's identity. That young woman had no idea she was talking to Mrs. Eleanor herself, but she knew my story, understood the values that built our company. In 2005, at 59 years old, I faced my biggest personal challenge: a diagnosis of breast cancer. It was frightening, of course. For a few weeks, I thought perhaps my journey was coming to an end, but then I remembered all the other battles I had faced, some much more desperate than this, when I had much fewer resources, much less support. If I survived that phone call in 1969, I can survive this, I told myself. The treatment was difficult. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy. I lost my hair, lost weight, lost energy, but I never lost determination. Michael and Diana were by my side at each appointment, each treatment session. And my employees, my girls, as I like to call them, even those who already have gray hair, organized a prayer chain that ran through all our shops. It was during recovery, when I was still too weak to leave the house, that I had the idea for our Memory Sweets line. Miniature versions of our most traditional treats packaged in small boxes, decorated with old photographs of the South to awaken emotional memories, the campaign said. It was an instant success, especially among the elderly and Southerners living far from home. In 2007, free from cancer and with renewed energy, I decided it was time to share my knowledge more broadly. I launched the TV program Sweet Secrets with Eleanor, initially aired on a regional channel and then expanded to the entire country through a national network. The format was simple. In each episode, I visited the home of an ordinary person, and together we prepared a traditional recipe while talking about family stories, overcoming new beginnings. It wasn't just a cooking show. It was a program about life, about transforming simple ingredients into something special, just as we can transform difficult experiences into valuable lessons. The program ran for 5 seasons and gave me the opportunity to meet incredible people all over the United States. People who, like me, had stories of falling and rising. People who transformed pain into art, into business, into purpose. In 2010, Sweet Memories took its boldest step: internationalization. We opened our first shop outside the United States in London, England. We chose the UK because of the historical roots, the cultural connection. It was a calculated risk, but one that proved right. The British fell in love with our American Southern sweets. Today we have shops in the UK, France, Germany, and Japan. The latter, a surprisingly receptive market to our sweets, especially pecan pie, which the Japanese consider a culinary work of art. International expansion brought new challenges, of course, recipe adaptations, logistical issues, cultural differences, but it also brought the satisfaction of seeing our small southern story conquering palates worldwide. And to think that it all started on a porch in Savannah. In 2015, at 69 years old, I decided it was time to reduce my executive role in the company. I would continue as chairwoman of the board, but daily operations would be in the hands of Michael and the team of directors we had formed over the years, many of them employees who had started as attendants or kitchen helpers and grew with the company. In the transition ceremony, I gave Michael a framed copy of the first recipe notebook I used when I started the business. It was yellowed, stained with sugar and grease, with notes in the margins made in my hurried handwriting. To me, that notebook was worth more than any Businesswoman of the Year trophy. This is the true heart of the company, I told him. It's not the contracts, it's not the numbers. It's the recipes, the stories, the care with each detail, the concern in making each customer feel special. Never lose sight of that. Michael understood. He grew up watching the business develop, absorbed our values, our culture. Under his leadership, sweet memories continued to grow, but without losing the essence that brought us here. Today, at 77 years old, I divide my time between occasional visits to the shops, lectures for young entrepreneurs, work at the foundation, and, of course, moments of rest, something I had to learn to value over time. Sometimes, when I'm in my home kitchen experimenting with a new recipe, I remember that young 32-year-old Eleanor, frightened and alone, not knowing what the future held. If I could go back in time and tell her something, it would be, don't be afraid. The pain you feel now will transform into your greatest strength. Today's tears will sweeten tomorrow's fruits. That's what I try to convey to every woman who approaches me after a lecture, to every letter I answer, to every interview I give, that our stories, no matter how bitter they may seem at certain moments, can be transformed into something sweet, something that nourishes not only ourselves, but everyone around us. And it all started with a phone call I should never have answered, according to the rules imposed by my ex-husband. A phone call that revealed lies, but freed me to live my truth. If there's one lesson I'd like to leave with you, my dears, it's this. Sometimes the greatest blessing comes disguised as tragedy. Sometimes what seems to be the end is just the beginning of something much bigger, much more significant. And sometimes all we need to change the course of our history is the courage to answer the call, whether it's a phone call, an opportunity, a challenge. Life has taught me that we are much stronger than we imagine, that we can fall, yes, but we can also get up, that we can transform our pain into purpose, our bitterness into sweetness, our scars into stars that illuminate the path for others. This is the story of Eleanor Williams, the girl who dreamed of being just a good wife and ended up building an empire. The woman who answered a forbidden phone call and discovered her own voice. The baker who transformed tears into sugar and created the sweetest flavor of all, the flavor of freedom, of self-discovery, of life fully lived on her own terms. Thank you for listening to me today. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel so you don't miss our next stories. Share with someone who might be needing a little hope. And remember, it's never too late to answer the call of your own life, to discover the strength that has always been inside you, just waiting for the right moment to bloom.